I've titled this presentation, Time to Transform Transformation. I actually got to bring it up. We're going to come back to why that is. We've been doing this event for 10 years now, and I've been getting a little bit nostalgic. I think a really good place to start this presentation is with one of the first slides that we ever showed at a digital event. And this might be old news for some, hopefully new news for a few of you. So this is the top 10 companies by market cap in the USA. We've got 1980s versus today. Of course, the today list is platform-first, technology-focused organizations, but that's not the key takeaway. Nothing from that left side maps to the right side. In fact, when you think about some of those right-hand companies, Google, Amazon, Meta, they weren't around when the first list came out. What do you think it's like in Australia? Yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. BHP, Westpac, Rio Tinto, but that list 1980s and today, it's very much the same organizations doing the same sort of thing. It's financial services, it's retail, it's mining and utilities. If we have a look at when those companies were founded, they're larger, historic, established institutions. I was thinking about this in the context of Australia, and there's an author called John Hagel who has something really interesting to say about this. He said, traditional organizations were designed to avoid risk and resist change. So if you think about your procurement life cycles, the hierarchies, even how we've traditionally approached innovation, these things are set up to reward stability, predictable 3 to 5 year forecasts. Whereas today, we need to think about how we're more agile and responsive to the external marketplace. The slide from the presentation before with the USA and Australia, the title of that presentation was the Digital Transformation Imperative. And I have a problem with that term because it suggests if we take our organizations in our current state, cocoon ourselves in digital technology, that we somehow emerge a butterfly on the other end. Something fundamentally changed and different. But as Jim mentioned, the majority of large-scale transformation projects, they'll fail. And they'll primarily fail due to the human element, the user resistance, the lack of adoption, the competing business priorities. So what have we learnt 10 years doing this event and 3 years deep diving into AI? What do top performers do differently? Well, we find that they define and measure value in very interesting ways. They don't underestimate the complexity behind managing people and a team and bringing people along the journey. And they focus on data maturity, how they use data to drive new experiences and to underpin AI readiness. So how did we get here with the AI imperative? Well, since ChatGPT scaled about 2 years ago, we've seen a high degree of interest. So this is CIOs actively investing in generative AI. We have 50% in 2023, up to 70% now. AI now consumes 4% of the overall IT budget on average. That's a considerable amount. And when we talk to CFOs about how they predict change happening over this year, AI is going to have a relative 7% increase, which is approximately the same as the reduction in research and development. So we need to ask ourselves a real question. And that question is, what's typically used to develop new products, new services, new experiences, if that's being cannibalized by AI, are we using AI to truly be innovative? So this is where the investment is. What are we doing about capturing value? So firstly, we ask your expectations around measuring value and when you expect to realize value from your transformation initiatives. And we see quite a wide spread here, right? Between under 6 months to 3 years, 5 years, and beyond. If I chop this up into bigger categories, it makes quite a lot more sense. 45% of us expect to see value in under a year. And a lot of organizations are achieving this by shifting from a project to a product mindset, where projects can be siloed, poorly handed over, poorly maintained until the next big project comes along. Focusing on digital products allows us to do smaller, more iterative, more easily measurable changes to our products, our services, and our platforms. When we ask you about the budget increase that you need to deliver on your digitization and automation, 32% say no uplift is necessary. And if I chop this up into bigger categories again, you can see that over half of us say that we need under 10% uplift. This time last year, we had Steve Hodgkinson sit on a panel. He heads up digital transformation for Vic Police. It's a difficult job. And he said something interesting about this. He said if you take a $20 million project to the board, it's really difficult to get approval. But if you can break it up into $5 million increments, then not only is it easier to get approval while you still have the strategy in your head of how it fits together, it's easier to attach value metrics to it. So we're feeding into that top area where you can prove value more in a faster way. So why is it time to transform transformation? Well, the term transformation implies the big, the bold, the provocative. This is none of those things. This is small, this is incremental, this is continuous value throughout the life cycle. The problem that we're having with this is as a nation, we're moving slower. So when we talk to CIOs about their top initiative this year, it's back-end modernization, ERP, CRM, and the issue with that is the life cycles are generally 2 to 5 years, particularly for some of those big ERP systems. And this is kind of a necessary evil. So say you head up digital platforms for a financial app, right? There's only so many times you can reskin that app without fixing the payment platforms, without fixing the CRM systems. As Jim mentioned, the perspective from the CFO in terms of how much we've deployed and used in our organizations, an average of 40% is wasted. And he made a really good point about how business cases are now harder to get through, but with inflation, with tariffs, the CFO is now more involved in this. Yes, that's good from a risk perspective, but it does tend to slow us down considerably. And when we ask you about the process you've made on your transformation and automation initiatives, you're about 46% of the way there. It was an average of 50% last year, and you can see that as much of a muchness. That doesn't mean we haven't made progress. What happens is technology moves fast, the goalposts move, legacy happens in a shorter period of time, and there is no 100%. We are always on this journey, so we need to think about where the markers are that we can track and measure value so it doesn't feel like we're moving backwards. Something else that's a continuous journey is how we manage our teams. And Jim showed you this slide before. I've actually combined chief data and chief digital officers, so it's a bigger proportion of GDP. And you can see the sentiment wasn't that different. We still have 23% that have no formal training for AI. That 38% guidelines, I'm going to be honest, that's purely risk reduction. That means if an employee comes to me and goes, sorry, I've leaked internal information to ChatGPT, we can say, no, we have guidelines. They're over there on SharePoint. It's 10 pages long. You probably didn't read it. We then have some areas of value add. That one that's the 23% is really interesting because it deals with two different strategies. It deals with champions and center of excellence. So the question we need to ask ourselves, if we're in that area, is how centralized is AI strategy? Do we have a team that's going to help develop the products, the use cases, handhold you through the process? Great, center of excellence. Or are we going to democratize it out and put the responsibility in the business units? Then champions is really good. As Jim mentioned, it is worrying that only 6% of organizations are mandating AI training. If we're going to back this as transforming our organization. The current impact of AI at work, one of the reasons why we're not doing the training is this user resistance. AI is coming for my job. The good news is, and current statistics as well, is 60% of chief data and digital officers say there's going to be no job impact. Only 3% are saying that it's replacing jobs currently. The majority of the other stuff is around augmentation, changing work, how we scale without adding new people. Only 14% of organizations that we surveyed had a formal data governance process in place. This is important for how we manage data quality, for how we manage uptime, reliability, accountability. And because of that, when we ask CISOs about how ready their organizations are to safely adopt AI, 76% of them say not ready. And we talked to CISOs quite recently, about 3 months ago, and they want to help the business grow. They want to help you balance this risk to innovation ratio, but to do that, they need to be brought in at the beginning. When they're bought in the beginning, the pace of digital delivery can actually accelerate because security is built into everything that we do. So Jim raised this earlier, the effectiveness in addressing different CX challenges. On the topic of people, I wanted to highlight these two. They're most prominent challenges. We are too slow to adapt, we're finding it difficult to evolve with customer needs, and slow and clunky process, where there's friction, inefficiencies, bureaucracy. I'm highlighting these two because they have nothing to do with technology. They're inherently human and process-driven. And a friend of mine, Peter Weil, from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, said something interesting about this. He said, digital transformation is not about technology, it's about change. And Jim mentioned user adoption, business silos, all these things that keep us in the way. But it's symptomatic of something deeper, something much more human. And that is that change moves us away from safety and moves us to something else. And Peter's really good at verbalizing, well, it doesn't necessarily move us to something scary. It moves us to excitement, it moves us to adventure, and it moves us potentially to better fulfillment. The area that we're last going to cover is data maturity. And we asked you how mature your organizations are using data to drive digital experiences. And we can see the majority of people are 55% in the middle. I would say as a footnote, there is a bit of psychology behind statistics with this, where sometimes when we don't know, that's the default, the 3, the middle, when we're not sure. So if we take that lens, and the lens that most of us want to be over that right-hand side, 80% of organizations are either neutral or negative in that statement. Data leads to better personalization. It leads to real-time delivery and more effective feedback areas where we can use things like behavioral analytics to feed future experiences. As you know as well, data is going to be critical for how we measure the success and feed AI models. So what are we doing with AI currently? And when we talk about AI, these days we're primarily talking about Gen AI. And you can see up the top, automating the technical, right? Things like cybersecurity, they've used machine learning for decades, and coding. There's a joke that us coders are the best at automating ourselves out of a job. After that, we have augmentation all over the place, whether it's synthesizing documents, helping people be more productive, emails, find answers more. It's not about strategic decision making. And if you have a look down the bottom, anything that has decision in it is primarily not tried because we feel uncomfortable taking human out of the loop. It seems a bit risky for us at the moment. And we're going to delve into that in the very last part with agentic AI. The 25% using it for customer and CX is interesting. So let's zone into that and see what we're doing currently with AI when it comes to conversational commerce. And you can see that 67% of you are investing in chatbots, about the same as it was last year. It was the top investment priority. An additional 60% in agentic AI. The issue with this is 56% of you have a negative sentiment about how effective it is in your organizations. It's not necessarily that it's not adding any value. It's not hitting the anticipated value that we expected, and it's not hitting the type of change that we expected from these initiatives. And the reason behind that is that over 50% of our respondents said that they cannot link conversational AI to any revenue or any business impact, which is crucial for how we measure value and how we use data to evaluate the success of these things. And now 50% of our audience is now likely to use agentic AI. And is it going to be the silver bullet that we think it's going to be and transform how we're doing different customer service operations? So Jim touched on something before. It was kind of a throwaway comment. The top use case for agentic AI is knowledge management in organizations. And that suggests that a lot of our respondents don't really understand agentic AI. And that's okay. When we've asked CIOs, when we've asked CFOs, CISOs, even some data leaders, I think it's a term that's poorly understood. So I have sort of a 30-second crash course. getting to know about agentic AI, I'm going to use an airline as an example. I'm not taking anything out of airlines. It's just something that all of us experience, right? It's easy to spot the frictions with the booking, with the management, with things like lost luggage. So the use cases kind of write themselves in this area. So what is agentic AI? Well, what's an AI agent, first of all? It's a singular bot performing a task that has the ability to make a decision based on context. That's what separates it from traditional automation. It can go with A or it can go with B. Agentic AI is just that at scale. It's a group of individual bots performing a task, essentially managed in an autonomous way that's free of any human interaction. So what can airlines do with this to solve an existing problem and then for a greenfield opportunity? So let's solve an existing problem. Let's say that we have an AI bot that's really good at tracking flight times. It just keeps polling and understanding where flights are. Maybe the context that it has behind it is it knows that if a flight is delayed from Melbourne to Sydney, it can make up the time in the Melbourne to Brisbane route. Next, we introduce another bot that can retrieve where people are in the booking system. The context could be that some people are part of a group booking or some people have connecting flights. Then another bot that can go into the CRM and it can make additional bookings. It can put people from one flight to another. What this leads to is solving a common problem. Flight delayed, offer an earlier flight. Right? And this can happen through push notification, it can happen through SMS, choose your poison. It's a very doable process. But for this to work, there's got to be the existing systems and processes set up. This is why I'm doing something greenfield. So say you're an airline and you want to do something completely new with agentic AI. Well, we can have a geography bot that understands how far things are away from each other and the preferred method of travel. AI agents don't need to work inside our firewall. They can actually go out to the internet. So we can have a look at forums that have online tour ratings, and then a separate one that checks the price and availability of those. Then we want something that has interaction and context. This could look like, I know that an 80-year-old couple that generally likes river cruises is fundamentally different to an 18-year-old backpacker, right? They value different things, have different ideas behind pricing. Now, all of a sudden, we've got a system where an airline can help you plan your dream holiday. And a colleague and friend of mine, David Nord's going to be up later, and he's actually going to give you an example of how this works in real time, which is going to be really cool. So what are the considerations or questions that you want to ask the business if you're looking to do this? Well, is the process that we have currently, is it clear? Because any holes in the process are going to be exacerbated by this. When you automate a bad process, you just scale it to become worse. The second thing we want to think of is what's the evaluation criteria? How do we evaluate as a whole? How do we evaluate the individual bots? And who's going to manage them? Is this going to be HR? Are they now in charge of digital employees as well as real employees? Is it going to be owned by the product owner in this area? Is it going to be an IT problem? And then what do we do when there's a problem? Say Geography Bot is not performing a task like they should. Do we retrain Geography Bot? Do we fire Geography Bot and get a new model in? We also want to think about what our risk appetite is for this, because this is going to be inherently risky and there will be problems in the way. Last one is, do we build or do we buy? And a lot of the providers now are using agentic AI. There's going to be some issues, of course, around sovereignty, what we do on our systems, stuff like that.